Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hammer Territory Podcast. This is episode 152. My name is Brad Rowland, and I'm joined, as always, by Scott Coleman. Scott, you're under the weather. How you feeling? What's going on?
Hello, Brad. I am very much doing my best Michael Jordan flu game tonight on the pod, but it's worth it because we have a great guest on the podcast tonight. The people love him. A little behind the scenes, Justin Toscano is joining us tonight, and Justin joined us, I think it was early January, and we did a lot of podcasts this offseason, but the show with Justin was one of our most listened and downloaded shows all winter long, so the people love him, and very happy to have Justin on the show with some boots on the ground down in Florida.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. That's I've been on twice now. That's two great intros, guys. Like two really good. You're talking me up here. It's a lot of pressure.
We'll try to talk you up. It's not that difficult, honestly. And if nothing else, we can just pivot to the Arizona versus Arizona State crutch if we have to use that one. We'll save it for later if we need to. But no, I mean, you're, as Scott said, Justin's on the ground in Florida. I am not there, nor is Scott. So we'll default heavily to Justin on this episode, I'm sure. But I guess to start things off, I mean, it has been, I think, 7 weeks since we talked to you last. In the middle of that, they did sign one big ticket player in Jerison Profar. Other than that, not much has changed, but they've been in camp now for a little while. The first full workout, I think, was Tuesday, as we're talking on Wednesday night. What's the vibe down there, Justin? How's everybody feeling? Is it upbeat? Like it's spring training, everybody's upbeat to some degree, but what's the vibe down there?
Yeah, it's been a little lower key, honestly, and I can't tell if that's. I try to balance my own expectations with what's the room actually like? I think the room is very positive. The vibe's good. The vibe for all 30 teams right now is good, except I guess the Boston Red Sox somehow have found a way to screw it up in a week. But the vibe is good. It feels low key, guys, because it feels like last spring. So this time last year, it was like, okay, World Series or bust from two guys, two main pieces. And I thought those comments were well warranted. As a member of the media, please keep saying stuff like that. Appreciate the honesty. But it's weird. Like you walk into that clubhouse and that whole corner where Charlie, Max, and Darno used to be, like completely gone. Like you don't see Sal Fasano walking through the clubhouse. It feels quieter. Maybe that'll change now that RC is here. But it's a little bit different of a mix in there. And I think there's a little bit of room for a guy like Olsen to be a little more vocal or a guy like Riley to be a bit more vocal. Honestly, I guess pitchers can't have as much of an impact, but a guy like Sale, to be who he is. And I think one of the underrated guys, I mean, he's so young and he was hurt last year, but Strider is one of those guys that is unvarnished truth, doesn't make excuses. He's one of those guys I think is going to be good for the room. And Profar gives them guys the edge that I thought they were missing from those two very good teams in 22 and 23 that were destined for big playoff runs that I just thought did not have that edge for whatever reason to carry it through October. It's a good vibe, but I think they're this year they've been noticeably more low key of let's not test the baseball gods again.
And you mentioned Jerison Profar a minute ago. I know it's been maybe a week or so that you've been able to be around him, but your early takes on Profar and kind of what kind of impact you think he's going to have on this team, especially as a veteran who's been around the game for a long time, even though, he's not an old guy by any means. I think he just turned 32, but this guy has a wealth of baseball experience and has kind of seen it all and done it all at this point.
Yeah, totally. I like the wide-ranging experience. Matt Olson's always been good, and this is nothing against those guys. Austin Riley came up and was great. Marcell Ozuna, to a degree. Acuña's a freaking superstar. Profar is a guy who never really lived up to the expectations, and I kind of like that mix in a clubhouse, right? It's on the pitching side for years, you had Charlie Morton, who was the same thing, where whether it was with Soroka or Smith Shaver or Elder or Strider or even Max, they all looked up to Charlie as a guy whose career, you felt like his career was over in 2015 and is still going. I like that mix. I like to add that to the mix, a gritty guy who figured out some lower half stuff last year. And I think he's going to be really good for the clubhouse. I mentioned the edge. By all accounts, last year in San Diego, he kind of kept Tatis, I don't want to say in check, but they were really good friends. And so I think he's one of those guys that people respect and can certainly fit into a clubhouse with more stars and more personalities. And I don't think it's going to be, I don't think he's going to be too big at all. And I like it, you can't quantify it, but this is a guy who fought with the Dodgers like 3 times last year. He fought with the Nationals once. Like, I think the Braves like need a little bit of that. Like, I wasn't on the beat at this time, but I remember from afar what it was like, what it felt like covering those games after Jock got there. And, after Soler was really rolling and when Rosario was going, and it just felt like, it was like it was like not a humble. Like that was like the thing, right? It's like there were some good dudes on that team, but there were also some dudes that are like, you know what? Like, screw you. Like, we're going to go out and like, we're going to like pound you. And like that, like, it feels like Profar is one of those guys. It's like, you know what? Like, I'm going to celebrate. And like, if I hit a walk-off, like, I'm going to dance in your face. And like, I'm not, I'm just loving the game and I'm having fun. And I think they needed a little bit of, this team is so business-like that I think they needed a little bit of spark like that. I love it, man. And then like, you hear like the pitchers talk about him, like Sale said, like, he's just such a tough at bat. Like, he doesn't give in. Like, he's got a great eye. Schwellenbach said the same thing. Like, he's one of those guys that like, you kind of got to make him get himself out. Like, he was like, that's the way to do it. He was like, last year, he's like, when I game planned against him, he was like, honestly, it was like, he doesn't really like chase much. He's like, and that's the one thing that like I noticed. And he was like, I kind of had to like try to have him get himself out and just find like those lower damage spots in the zone. I really think they needed a bat like that, guys. Like, we saw Ozzie in the 2-hole a lot, and this is nothing against Ozzie, but there's a lot of free swingers on that team. I think they need the guy who can get on base. Like, this thing, guys, I think especially when Ronald comes back, like, this thing's going to be moving. Like, that top of the order all the way through the middle. Like, I like the ability to, I guess as baseball people say, like, make things happen, in quotes. Like, I don't know. It's kind of like dogging him, but he makes things happen. He's not particularly fast or anything, but it's like, it just always seems like he's in the middle of something. And I feel like they just needed more action up there after Ronald.
Hey, this episode is sponsored by Orgain. And AJ, I know as a former big leaguer, you care about what you put in your body, but don't you also care about what tastes good? Don't you want to get a little protein action that actually tastes good if you're going to have it every day?
Absolutely. I had it today after my workout, Scott. It was great. I had chocolate, and vanilla and chocolate are my 2 favorites. I can't decide which one I like more, but I drink them after I work out. I worked out this morning, came right home, bam, 30 grams of protein through the Orgain. Perfect.
And so what should you do? Order both. Their new 30-gram complete protein shakes offer protein-packed real nutrition designed to satisfy those cravings without any added sugar. There are no quick fixes when it comes to your health. If you want more protein, give Orgain 30-gram protein shakes a try. Head to Orgain.com/FOUL30. Use code FOUL30 for 30% off your order. That's the best offer that you're going to find. You have to use the code FOUL30 for 30% off.
This is kind of a follow-up to that, but it also is about what you said about like kind of the vibe with the team and a little bit more edge. They didn't have, you mentioned Strider already. They didn't have Ronnie for the second half of last year. 2 guys that actually have edge already that weren't there. So of a team that, look, and this is honestly, I'll raise my hand. Not something I always think about because we're not there every day. This is part of the reason why we love to have you on. But giving those guys, obviously the big draw is that they're awesome at baseball. Your best hitter and your best pitcher, arguably, from the last couple of years coming back. But both guys have a little edge. Strider's a little bit different than Ronnie, of course, but they're not subtle. They're not super quiet like your Matt Olsons, your Austin Rileys are. What's the vibe around those guys? And obviously, I know Ronnie spoke. There was a lot of attention paid to his first comments in a long time. Like, what was that reaction like? And having him back is obviously once he's playing, it speaks for itself. But just being around the team again.
Yeah, that's big because I think Ronald's like an instant spark. Like, how good he is and what he can do on the bases and just how much joy he plays with. And like, what's funny is I always tell people, because there are people who ask me like how he is to cover. Like, they hear like, oh, he's tough to get or this, that, and the other thing. The guy, like, people see the neon like sleeves and the colorful shoes and stuff, and they think like they see him smiling and laughing and dancing, and they think like, oh, he's just this flashy guy. He's pretty reserved. Like, that's the funny thing about him is like, I have come to appreciate the authenticity of Ronald's personality on the baseball field, because that's really not who he is off of it. Like, he's very like he'll like, joke around with Ozzie and Arcia and say hi to his teammates and stuff, but he's not this like class clown in the clubhouse. And I've always thought it goes a much longer way if you're genuine. And I think that's what Ronald does so well is like, he loves to freaking play baseball. Like the guy loves baseball. Like that's what he does. And like when he's on the baseball field, like that's his happy place. And like, I know that sounds cliche, but that's his greatest gift to this team, other than the 5 tools he gives them, is that it comes from such a genuine place that I think guys like rally around that. Like he's already like doing stuff and he's bouncing around and, and he's playing well. He's as happy as can be. And I think that's a big strength. The one thing I like about Strider, and look, I'll preface by saying, I know guys like the media, we don't get the unvarnished truth all the time from guys. I get that it's a PR game sometimes, like totally get it. So I'm not trying to speak on it as if it's not. Strider's a no BS guy, man. Like I think there's a certain degree, the last couple of years, there was a certain degree of, the postseason's, it's just a crapshoot, or, it's just baseball. Like when the team's struggling for 3 weeks, they've been struggling since April 29th of last year, right? Like that Seattle series is when it all started. It had gone for months and it's just baseball. Feels like we're hitting balls hard and da-da. Like that's not really the Spencer Strider method. And that's what I like about him is I think that clubhouse needed, like Sale at one point last year was like, we're right there. But he's like, honestly, we got to put the pedal to the metal. Like we've got to and you could see he was frustrated. And I think that clubhouse, to be honest, like needed, and again, behind closed doors, probably saying different stuff. But I think that clubhouse, the more you say psychologically, I think the more you say something, the more you start to believe it. And I think honestly, that clubhouse needed a little bit of like a reality check and like a diversion from it's just baseball. You can get unlucky. And a little more of what Strider said after the 23 exit in the DS, where he was like, look, like we've honestly got to take a long look at our process. He's like, because you can win all the games you want in the regular season, but if we're coming here and we're like getting bounced in the first round, he's like, we've got to unwrap every part of this process, take a long look at how we're preparing for the playoffs, how we're trying to, he's like, and I think the point there is like, you're always trying to peak in the right times. And this Braves team, like some of it's been bad luck with injuries, and like the Fried stuff and Morton stuff of 22 and 23, whatever. But it's like, I think there's just like an accountability that Strider brings and that Sale has too. And I think that's going to be a really good thing. So having those guys back around, like Strider, Acuña's just a spark in whatever he does, but Strider's like so meticulous about certain things that I really think a lot of guys can learn from it. Like, is everybody going to be as obsessed about everything in the routine as he is? Like, no, like guys like don't work. Like not everybody's like that, but I do think it raises the floor of like a standard, especially as it comes to like a Grant Holmes, especially as it comes to a Schwellenbach, who is the same as Strider, but there's a thought process behind things he does kind of in a similar way. I think having those two back is huge. And as much kind of, Brad, you were getting into this, as much as I think it hurt him on the field, I think it ripped a little bit of the heart and soul out of this team with those two guys as injuries specifically.
And Justin, I know the Braves, I mean, I thought it was interesting that, back in December, Alex went out of his way to say the Braves are not going to have Strider or Acuña on the opening day roster. And then a couple of days ago, when he met with you and the rest of the media members, kind of reaffirmed that and also said that they don't anticipate really having them in the spring either, in spring training games. From what you've heard and seen on the ground, I mean, do you have a general idea of maybe what they're thinking for debuts for Strider and Acuña?
Yeah, so my best guess, I think it'd be April for both of them, especially because Alex said that Strider, at this point, they expect him to pitch in a spring training game, which tells me, I mean, look, if you need like 4 or 5 rehabs, build up starts, I think you could get one here, and then, he could be back. I think he'll be back late April. Like that would be my best guess. And then Acuña similarly, especially because he's like 95%, like he hasn't really cut a ton yet, but he's like taking BP, looks awesome, balls flying off the bat. I think they're just trying to be extra cautious with him, which is a good thing after what happened in 22 where he had to manage all that knee pain. in my own head, like they've all been very coy about it, but in my own head, I'd be surprised if they're not both back by the start of May. Like I think this is going to be a shorter term thing. So as we look to, whether it's like, the outfield or kind of the rotation, I think I really don't think this is barring a setbacks for either of those guys. I really don't think it's going to be too long. I think, Braves fans probably only have to kind of last a few weeks without those guys.
Yeah, I feel like we've talked about the team like they're already there, even while acknowledging that they're not. It's one of those. I mean, almost all the coverage is like, all right, well, just pencil those guys in. Well, yeah, they're coming at some point. And I couldn't help but laugh when you were talking earlier about Ronnie doing BP. It feels like Ronnie's doing BP every hour of every day. It's like you see him, he's on Instagram. He's like, oh, he had knee surgery 2 days ago. He's out there doing BP right now. I'm kidding to some degree, but speaking about his like love for baseball, like he just seems to just want to hit all the time, which I think is not a bad thing. If you're for your superstar 20, whatever it is, 26-year-old to just want to hit all the time, it's probably good.
He loves baseball. And like, that's the thing that these guys, scouts, they try to nail. Like that's the hardest thing, especially on the international scene, is they're meeting these guys when they're 12, 13, whatever. And you're trying to project, okay, like what position is this guy going to play? But also, like an underrated part of it, I guess this maybe doesn't come into to play as much with Acuña, who didn't receive like a very high signing bonus comparatively to who they've, gotten these last few years. But like you try to nail the makeup, and it's like scouts always tell you like that's you just don't know. Like you have to ask the family, like you have to like how much do they value education? Like how much do they value manners? Like you're using these very like it's harder than it is on the amateur side because you have like, scouts always tell you like ask the janitor about like a kid or ask like the, a random student or whatever. Like you can get, there's avenues. It's a little tougher on the international side. And that's what I think people don't see about Ronald. Like I know there's been some made about, if he blows off the media here, if he, he got hit by a pitch and he kind of flopped around or whatever. Like, I don't care. It's like, I think the guy loves baseball. And that's the thing, like they nailed, like you look at his makeup, like there is nothing he wants to do more than play baseball. And I think like to my eye, like he doesn't, he's not like one of those guys that's out partying all the time. Like he's not late everywhere. Like he just wants to play baseball. Like he wants to go in the clubhouse. He wants to get his bat. He wants to go to the cage. He wants to hit. He wants to go out to BP. He wants to launch balls. Like he wants to play in the games. Like he doesn't want to DH. He wants to play in the field. Like he loves everything about it. And I think that's why you feel so good about a guy like Ronald's talent, because I don't think there are really detractors there. Like the game is what he does. Like, I don't know, he might play video games or something, but baseball is him.
Makes sense to me. And this is going to be kind of an interesting segue. So get ready for it, Justin.
Okay.
He used to be the number one prospect, Ronald Acuña. Now their number one prospect, Drake Baldwin. No, I'm kidding. I'm not kidding, but he's getting a lot of buzz right now. Yeah. Drake Baldwin is, and obviously a different path than Ronald took, but it feels like he's getting more juice than I thought he was going to get this time. I saw he was like number 11? Scott can correct me. Number 11 on the Fangraphs list, and that's pretty rarefied air. It's not where Ronnie was, who was I think number 1 on that list at one point. But like you're getting to the point where I always draw my line of like prospects I really, really, really care about as a non-prospect guy is like the uber elite guys, the guys you can't trade. He's not quite where Ronnie was, but like it seems like everybody's like, hey, this guy's legitimate. What's the buzz down there about Baldwin?
Yeah, they like him. And you could tell like Snit's high on him. I mean, he's been around these guys in terms of the catching group for a couple years now in big league camp, really developed well. And he's a nice kid. Like you can tell like, okay, like, of course this is a guy that the pitchers love. Like the pitchers like throwing to him. Like I think it was Waldrop saying that the other day that he likes throwing to him. They have a good relationship. And you can tell, like you talk to him and you're like, this is a catcher, like you can't have rocks for brains if you're a catcher. And you're like, this guy is like, yeah, like I could see this guy leading a staff. Like he's got that about him. Like he's got that it factor of like nice kid, baby face, but he's like, yeah, he's confident. He's like got the body for it, the build for it. And he's like, I can see like where all the buzz, and then obviously like, the BP and the just the physical attributes and whatnot. I am surprised too, because I usually take stock of, I'll look at all the prospect things, but I like how Fangraphs digs into guys personally. Like I really take a lot of stock in what Fangraphs has to say about a guy. So number 11 to me means a ton. And the love he got with like Baseball Prospectus too, for me, carries a lot of weight. I'm going to be honest. Like I thought he was a guy they could trade. Like when we were going into the offseason, I'm like, oh, like this is the guy. Like you got Shawn Murphy. Like this guy is going to be used to get, if they want to get Crochet or to get somebody else. The fact that he wasn't tells me a lot, because I think there could have been some deals. Like I know the Braves were in on Crochet and wanted him and tried to get him. There could have been some deals. Maybe Baldwin was like their cutting off point, and obviously they don't have very many A-plus prospects. And if you have more A-plus prospects, you're going to be willing to deal them more than a team like the Braves who has fewer A-plus prospects. But the fact that they kept him says a lot to me. I think they like that development. The only question I'd have in the future is, look, if you want Murphy to catch the lion's share and make the most of that contract, like, I don't know how you do it. Like, even if you bring him up in the summer, do you just, is it 60-40? Is it 65, 35? Is it, and they're always big on the Braves. They want kids to play every day. Like they want prospects to play every day. You don't want a guy lose his value. And you certainly don't want something to happen to him, guys, where like, not saying Smith Shawver has no more value, but the longer he's in AAA and not the rotation and not the big leagues, I feel like the lower his trade value is, unless somebody wants to take a shot on him. You don't want that to happen to a catcher like Baldwin, who's only, going to get later into his 20s. It almost feels like time to, or get off the pot eventually.
I was going to say the natural follow-up is exactly that. I mean, I was about to ask you that question that you just answered. It's like, all right, well, right. At this position, there's not a whole lot of flexibility. And, all the messaging has been, at least that I've read from people like you, that Murphy's going to catch the most he's ever caught in Atlanta this year. That's the plan anyway. So when you have this guy entrenched that you're paying, that you're hoping for a bounce back on, that's signed long-term, and then you have this guy behind him, you got to do something. And it seems like also some catching prospects are not like married to catcher, if that makes sense. But it seems like Baldwin is going to be a catcher. Like there's value in his defense there too. So it's not like he's in a spot where it's like, all right, move him to left field. Go ahead and do that right now. They don't want to do that. It doesn't seem like. So it's very interesting. Kind of to your point, it's either make the move now or don't, or it's a weird transition period potentially.
Yeah. And the way you could do it is, honestly, you've got Ozuna coming off the books next year. The way you could do it is, if I envision a scenario, let's just say it's 65-35 in his first year, full year of the big leagues. I could envision a scenario where, look, you give this kid every day at bats, you'll shuffle him in at DH, get him close to every day at bats. That gives him time to be around the catcher's meetings a lot more, and to not have to drink from the fire hose in terms of the game calling, the receiving, the working with the staff, knowing what cues guys like. I think there's a balance you could strike in there, especially because I think we all thought when the universal DH came out that it was going to be like, okay, well, you want it like to be like the old school American League. You just want a bopper in there. I think teams honestly value the versatility more in terms of opening up an extra roster spot to just kind of shuffle guys around and get guys off their feet. I think you could do that with Drake. And I think at this point, like you said, Brad, like he is a catcher. Like he's definitely not one of those guys, I don't think, that's like, and that doesn't seem to be the vibe, where it's like, he'll just be a DH, or he'll play first base eventually. Like it left field. It's like, no, he's a catcher. And I think you could do it where, the Braves always said, look, Smith's been saying this for years, like catching's a two-man job in the modern day game. And there's only one Real Muto, in baseball. There's only a couple guys who could do it. I guess the plan for them before the injury last year was for Murph to catch that many games last year. So I guess Travis wouldn't have had as big of a role if they had kind of their ideal scenario. So I guess that was their plan last year. But yeah, you start to wonder, especially with the contract they gave Murphy, or could they eventually, I don't know, could they eventually trade him if they like Baldwin enough? I don't know, if he doesn't make that much. I'm not saying, Braves are going to trade Shawn Murphy. I don't think that's the case at all. They value Shawn Murphy a ton. I'm just saying that his contract isn't such where you have no flexibility. And I still think he's one of the best catchers in baseball, defensively, the pitchers really like him and like throwing to him. I think Atlanta could just have one of the best catching tandems in the sport again if Baldwin pans out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the catcher situation in Atlanta is fascinating. And I mean, other than the Acuña and Strider comebacks. Those are probably the two biggest storylines for this team right now. But I mean, is third, what kind of season does Shawn Murphy have? Semicolon, and what does Drake Baldwin do? Because I mean, across the rest of the roster, there's a lot of certainty, or at least as much certainty as you can have in baseball. I mean, that to me, it's clearly a top 5 kind of storyline for the upcoming season, I feel like.
Yeah, totally. Huge year. I think it's gonna. I'm high on Murph just because I like the makeup, and I like what he can do. Like I think digging into some of his numbers. Like he's always, for the last few years, has had pretty good exit velocity. Like he's barreled up balls. Like I like what he can do. He can definitely change a game with one swing. He's one of those guys that, look, if you need him to hit 7th, like I'm fine with that. I think the stop and go hurt him a lot last year because I do think that is really tough to get going and everybody's at 100, you're at 0. It's like trying to get like live at bats against guys who've been playing for 3 months. And it's like, I think playing more regularly is going to help him a lot. Now his body's going to need to handle that in a way it hasn't since 22 and 21. But this is what he used to do with the A's. And now he's in his prime. Like I think his body's going to be able to handle it. And that, I think that is as big of a storyline as any, because I always felt like they had certainty from that spot when it was Murph and Travis last year. Like I wasn't really seeing the catching spot turning out how it did last year. And granted, you can't forecast injuries, but yeah, at this point, like most of the rest of the roster's set, right? I know Alex said, I'm pretty sure you guys discussed this, that they were going to do a deal that would have pushed them over, the tax. And I know for a fact, or at least somebody, I trust a lot, that they were going to, I can't say it publicly, but they were going to sign, they were thinking they were going to sign somebody, and then it didn't, at the last moment, it didn't happen, but they had, it was like an offer kind of was out. And so I do know like that was true. Like they could have added, and they were very close to adding recently. I think even like after pitchers and catchers reported or around then. But it's like, so other than that, I mean, the only things you could really pick out is like, can you get through a month with Ian and Holmes? And I think that catcher one, guys, is as big as any. Like I love Murph's defense, but you can't, I don't think you can get nothing out of that spot. You need something. And I'm not saying it's got to be like 2023 first half. But I think, and I think, Murph said last week, like he was a combination of things happened, but that he was pressing and it was just hard to get back up to speed. He'll never make excuses, but that's objectively difficult. And, so yeah, they've got to be better, because it felt like last year they just could never get traction in that spot.
And you alluded to the rotation a minute ago. And again, speaking of major storylines for the Braves in 2025, but you had an interesting piece the other day about two probably most prominent pitching prospects in the organization, Hurston Waldrep, and the fact that he is reintroducing his curveball. And AJ Smith-Shawver is also trying to add a cutter to his pitch mix. So just what you've seen and heard from those guys in the early days of camp. And I mean, it feels like at some point this summer, at least one of those guys is going to have his name called.
Yeah, I think those two are, when you talk about, look, you need 8, 10, 12 starting pitchers in a season. I think that's what you're talking about. And in years past, like I still think Bryce Elder can give you something good or something decent here or there. But you remember when we had, it's like they had Jared Schuster, Dylan Dodd, Elder, and you're kind of shuffling through. I feel good about the Waldrep Smith-Shawver scenario. Waldrep, he was saying that, I guess when they got him in the system, they took out the curveball. They figured, work on the slider to play better with the splitter and, off the fastball, that sort of thing. And now he's reintroduced it. I know he's watched a lot of Garrett Cole. He's watched a lot of Verlander. He's watched a lot of Max Scherzer, who he likes, because it's like you can see the curveball a lot one day and then like not really that much his next start. There's a lot of versatility there and kind of changing up his mix. And I think Smith-Shawver is going to be a lot better for what he experienced, in San Diego and just what, but I'm not going to lie, like, unless he learned from the injury or developed during then, like, it kind of was a lost season for him, right? So you wonder, like, where he's at. Like, you wonder, like, can he rein it in? Like, the guy's got great stuff, a great arm. Like, can he rein it in? Waldrep, like, same thing. Like, is he going to walk 4 batters a game? Like, if not, it's probably going to go well. But, but if the walks are still high, he's got more developing to do. I'm not here yet, but at the very worst, I think Waldrop's a very good reliever. Like if it doesn't pan out in the future, like I think he's got the great stuff and a great one pitch in terms of the splitter. Like the Braves, when they drafted him, I know like their scouts thought that pitch was an out pitch then, in the majors. But I still like Waldrop. There's a thought process behind what he does. I sense some of the different guy than Strider, obviously, in different backgrounds and, whatnot. But I sense some of the same thought about pitching, right? And thought about intentionality. And one thing I think it's interesting, like when the kid was in high school, like he came up with his high school strength program in Thomasville. Like he read some like strength training books and watched some videos from these like pro strength trainers. And he's like, hey coach, like we should be doing this. So like, here's why we should do this. So like he was very diligent about that stuff. And it almost reminds me of like the constant edge somebody like Strider tries to get. Like I see some of that in Waldrop. I think he's going to be successful. I could just be dead wrong and somebody will post this clip in 5 years, but I like him. I'm high on him. I need to see more of Smith Shopper because I know he's got a great arm, but here and it hasn't seemed like he's been able to rein it in. But then again, he really, it's like I asked him the other day, it's like it's kind of weird. He really hasn't been pitching for that long.
First of all, you're assuming that people actually listen to this podcast and would pull the clip to show it back to you in 5 years. I hope that's true. Shots for our listeners, but
they do.
No. So those guys are interesting, and you already mentioned. I think I've been kind of whispering that maybe they could even have Waldrop in the bullpen this year if they had to at some point. Because there's nothing that says you can't send a guy there and then bring him back to start again. It's happened before. Many places, many young arms have gone there first. But speaking of the bullpen, I mean, been a lot of focus on that on this podcast as well. We've talked a lot about the bullpen recently. It's not the picture, grab the screenshot of the list of names. It's not the sexiest group outside the first four or five guys. They brought in Buck Farmer, who I was excited about. I have a connection to Buck Farmer, so that was nice to see. He's a real pitcher, but he's still minor league contract with a spring training invite. Lots of opportunity, it seems like. Is that the word that everyone's trying to use right now? There's like just open spots down there. I mean, is it really a battle? Like, how committed are they to these guys?
Yeah. I think to a degree it's a battle, right? Obviously, like, I don't think it's just like throwing stuff at the wall because I think there's some guys who have an inside track, just based on situation. But yeah, it's like that's been the word. It's like a lot of opportunity, like the most opportunities in the bullpen, or like Alex was like, we'll take the best 8, or Snit was like, we got a good mix of names there. And, it's something like we don't really have to deal with a lot as reporters covering the Braves. Cause like last year it was like 7 names, you knew 7 of the 8, and the 8th was just going to be like, okay, who's the long guy, to start the year. And this year, look, you got Iggy, obviously closing. Pierce is going to have to take a lot of those 8th innings, I would think. Dylan Lee, I think he's got to take a step. Dylan Lee's a very important, low-key, very important player for them this year, in my opinion, because I think he's got to take a step in high leverage. I don't see another way. Bummer is going to be very important. I think Bummer got caught on the wrong end of some things last year, luck-wise. But I like the name of the game's preventing runs. I get it, but I do think. I don't know, man. It did seem like there were a lot of bleeders and some well-placed ground balls that got Bummer. So you got those 4, right? Here's how I see it playing out after that. Daysbell, who they've talked up for months and has been in the bullpen before, made the postseason roster a couple years ago in a surprise. I think Daysbell makes it. That's 5. The one thing that piqued I guess when you're a reporter, like you key in on things and whether they're correct or wrong with your intuition, they make you think things. And one of those things for me was that Snit said Buck Farmer. He portrayed him as this multi-inning guy, and he's a multi-inning guy who can, he started before and he can fill that role. Guys, to me, that screams long man out of the bullpen while you need to use Ian and Holmes in the rotation to start the year, right? I think Buck Farmer will be in that bullpen as a multi-inning guy to do kind of whatever they need. I thought Chase and Shreve was really interesting as a lefty with major league experience, but I don't think they're going to add another lefty. I think they'll go with Angel Perdomo. And the reason why is rehabbing last year, kind of, on their dime. and whatnot, and he's out of options. That's the big thing with him. Like, look, like the guy had great numbers, some good numbers in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was too cheap to let him rehab on their dime. The Braves might benefit. Like this guy, like Brad, like walking past this guy is how I imagine it is for you, like covering the Hawks. Like this guy is like a true like 6'7", 6'8". He is a big dude. And you know, I think they could have something there with Perdomo. Like I'm excited to see how he is when it comes to, you know, more lives and spring games and the regular season. I think he makes it. And then Anderson Pilar had some good numbers. The Rule 5 guy from Miami, he had some good numbers. The reason I think they probably take a flyer on, you know, they probably have him for one of those spots is you never like, yeah, like 50,000 is not that much to, you know, to pay back or to pay, you know, the first place. But it's like, if you're going to take a guy in the Rule 5 draft, like you think he's got a decent shot at the time, right? Of being like on the roster. And I think with him, they like his numbers in, you know, the Winter League. He was really good. His numbers, he had a really, really good walk rate in the minors last year. That was really noticeable. And again, like if he's not on the roster, they lose him. So I think like Alex set it up already where he said like, look, there might be a lot of churn. And I think that's what it's going to be. I think this bullpen on April 1st is going to look a lot different than it is on September 1st, October 1st, and so on. But I think there's some guys there. And I think they need Daysbell to step up. They need Dylan Lee to step up. Like those are two guys that you absolutely need for leverage, especially how Snit talks about Dylan Lee not being just a matchup lefty because he's got that slider too and just his mix. They're going to need that position group is going to be interesting, but I get the sense that Perdomo and Pilar are going to be in. You know, I don't think they'll carry the other Rule 5 guy, Cairo, but I think Pilar is going to be in there.
It kind of feels like for the first time, at least since you jumped on the beat, Justin, like there's some legitimate battles here. Like you said a moment ago, we basically had 7 relievers in pen this time a season ago, and this year we have 4 of them, maybe 5. You know, we said on the show the other night, it doesn't make sense to send Daysbell back to Gwinnett once again. Like just see what he can do. He has the live fastball, a lot of swing and miss. But even if you really believe in Daysbell, that's 3 legitimate bullpen questions. You know, we'll see. And then similarly, you have. Is it your understanding that Ian Anderson is a virtual lock to be in the rotation, short of him just getting absolutely pummeled this spring because he's out of options? And it's kind of like, why not see if there's anything left?
Totally. Yeah. Especially because he's out of options. He did so much for them years ago. He rehabbed with them. And it's one of those things like Alex, especially, teams will try to do this, but Alex especially is a huge preserve your depth at all cost guy. Mm-hmm. And he will make decisions based on that, knowing that like, okay, like if Ian's got to go to the bullpen after, you know, when Strider's back, you keep him and whatever, you can do that. Or you can, if he's eventually on the injured list, you bring somebody else up. Or Alex is a huge preserve your depth guy. Like preserve your depth at all costs. It drives, if guys are remotely close, it drives a lot of those decisions. And I think, yeah, to your point, Scott, like bringing that up, like anything short of him just getting shellacked in spring, like it would need to be like, I think he's pretty much a lock, right? Like you're going to see what he has there. And in your head, if you're the Braves, you're like, okay, you've got, and I found this interesting too, speaking and keying on things. I don't know if you guys noticed this the other day, but standing there, I noticed 2 different times Alex brought up Holmes before he brought up Ian. Or brought up Holmes only and not Ian. That was a big thing. That was intentional, I think. And that's what he said at one time. Like, hey, the reason I'm mentioning him was because, look, like you kind of get the upper hand when you pitch well for us last year and you're the most recent guy. So if you're the Braves, in your head, right, you're going to be like, okay, like if this doesn't work out, like we can just move Ian to the bullpen. And then he throws the crap innings for you and he fills a good role there, whatever it is. If it does work out, then great. You got like, you got another good starter again. And if it doesn't work out at all, then okay, well, you lose him and it didn't work out. But I think, and this was the previous regime, and I know the previous regime was very, very high on Ian, obviously, based on where they took him. And I know they remained confident in him, like Brian Bridges, just, even when after he was hurt. But you don't want your number 3 overall pick or whatever. You don't want to just give up on that guy. I think he's got to be in there. I would be shocked. You're not going to go to a guy with options if you don't need to use that guy with options, right? Like, why burn an option until you need to burn an option? Yeah. If you've got these 2 starters and you've spent all winter trying to add to the rotation in a way that would be substantively better than either Ian Anderson or Grant Holmes, I think you roll with them. That's a lock for me, man.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, kind of like you said, and the fact that Ian was a 3rd overall pick, the last thing you want to do is bail early and then let him sign with, like the Cleveland Guardians, who are a pitching factory, and all of a sudden Ian is a really good number 3. That would be a black eye.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in different situations, so like Kyle Wright had that resurgence, but Kyle's injury was like perforated like holes in his shoulder, like a capsule injury. And it was like, that's how he described it. It was like perforated holes. And you could see, like, I tried to ask about this at the time, and didn't get a ton of an answer, but like you could see based on the way the Braves handled that trade and just not giving him that 40 spot, not paying the cheap ARB salary that wasn't really going to go up that much after, during the rehab year anyways, for the next year. You could see that the Braves didn't believe that he would be the same with his shoulder. You could see that the medical folks very clearly advised, like, yeah. And with Ian, it's Tommy John surgery, right? Like, this is, I hate to say it because it sounds so like robotic and monstrous, but like, this is normal. Like, guys are going to have 1 or 2 of these in their career. Like, with the way they throw now, a lot of guys are going to have them. He could very well be better for what he experienced, especially like mentally. He's focused on kind of locking in some things. And yeah, like you said, Scott, Ian Anderson is the perfect, like, oh, you DFA'd him, like, he goes to Cleveland, or, oh, you know what, like, we're the Rays and we would really like to have him and see him pitch to a 3 ERA for us. Like, I think Ian's got a little something left. I need to see a little more, because a lot of his postseason stuff, I remember at least watching from afar, it was like 6 hits and like 3, like he walked the tightrope a little bit here or there. But the guy definitely has got the stones, in the big moments, and he wants them. And he seemed as motivated as ever. I remember how motivated he was last year coming off of that to prove he was going to make, he was eventually going to be on the team and make starts. Didn't happen for him. He hit a wall toward the end of the year. So he understood why the team went with Smith-Shawver, but he was disappointed. Like, he was disappointed that they went with Smith-Shawver for that postseason game. And I think there's a lot of Ian that's more fueled and more motivated than he's been in a while, because it's like he's pitching for the first time in a couple years,
Yeah. And, I think on this show, we have all been frustrated to varying levels about the lack of moves other than Jerks and Profar and a dozen minor league free agent tryouts, basically. But I can at least see the vision. And if Strider's going to miss a month, then you do let Ian get 5 or 6 starts and you see how he does. And presumably some are going to be against good teams, some are going to be against bad teams. And you just kind of reevaluate maybe 3 or 4 or 5 weeks into the season and go, okay, Ian has an ERA in the 3s. He looks back, or he has an ERA in the 5s and he can't get through a lineup a second time. Then maybe you figure out a way to whatever your next course is going to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing I was going to mention about the bullpen that kind of slipped my mind as I was rambling about those guys, because it's the most we've had to talk about the bullpen in like 3 years, is the same thing here. Like, I hate to say it, like, knock on wood, I don't know if people can hear that, but the injury bug, these things, all, like, the thing I've learned covering baseball especially, 1,000% of the time, these things sort themselves out. Like, there will be a guy who gets injured, and then you need both Ian and Holmes and Strider's in there, and maybe it's Lopez on the IL, or maybe Sales on the IL, or maybe, God willing, this doesn't happen. But if Strider ever had a setback, you would still need Ian and Holmes. There's so many things that could happen where I just feel like there's going to be so much opportunity. And like you said, Scott, it's like, I think that's exactly what you do. I think you got to give Ian a little bit of runway. Like, I hope for his sake, he gets at least like 4 starts, 3 starts, to kind of see like, okay, like, get his feet under him. The last thing you want to see is the guy not continue to develop, because if Holmes pitches well, Strider comes back, if Ian's the odd man out, because I know like they think Holmes has legit like plus pitches.
Yeah.
And if Ian's odd man out, like that really, I think about his development. I know it's, what's best for the team. I get it. But it's like, as a baseball fan and I'm curious to see how this guy comes back. And I hope we get to see more than like 3 starts of it. Like I want to see how Ian adjusts to even, like being back from Tommy John and the wall he hit last year. And like, I think there's a lot of, you can evaluate after 4 weeks. You can evaluate after 5 weeks. And to that point, I know they tried to add in the rotation a couple different times this winter and were particularly close on something that didn't work out. But so that tells you that Alex deep down thought that they needed to improve the rotation, or at least he thought that was enough of a priority to look into doing so. And I think that's the part of you that knows that even as he says, and you guys probably played the audio on this show of like, even as he says like, well, look, we got Strider coming back. He replaces Fried. If Holmes can take Morton's spot, then we have Anderson and da-da-da-da-da. Alex always knows you need more pitching, right? Like that's the one thing, like he always knows you need more pitching, and it's a big thing. And so I know they tried to add to the rotation and that was a focus. Stuff didn't get done, but I don't think it was for lack of effort. And I just think eventually these things will sort themselves out. But as like a baseball fan, I kind of want to see Ian get a little bit of runway. Like I don't want that to mean Strider has a setback or that anybody gets hurt, but I just kind of I don't want to see this guy's development stunted where now it's like, oh, this once promising postseason hero is now DFA'd,
Yeah, I mean, you said it already, but about things working out. But with the way that they've treated Sale and Lopez, and with Strider coming back, they might maybe they go with 6 for a while, like just to get Ian more. There's different ways they can do this. Is kind of the moral of the story. It seems like there's flex. I mean, the word flexibility can be a boogeyman sometimes, but also it's also true. Like Grant Holmes could be in the bullpen at some point because obviously it works there. He was great in the bullpen last year. There's things that they can do back and forth.
Oh, totally. And that's what I was thinking a little, like when Scott was laying that out at first, I was like, you know what? I think there's a part of me that thinks Grant could be in the bullpen because as much as I think he can throw 4 good innings, I almost wonder if like his best role is like 2 innings in the middle of a game or something. Like I really like his stuff. And like, I almost wonder like if he doesn't really, I mean, he's not throwing like 100, but it's like, if he doesn't have to save himself for a 4th, a 5th. And the other thing you got to think about starting is last year, the Braves needed Holmes to make some of these spot starts, get us through 4. Well, if you're in the rotation, like you got to be pushing 6. I mean, at least, and that's like the one thing to like saving the bullpen, like to that point, especially when you're not going to have as much certainty there right now. I think the best case scenario for Atlanta, as much as like Holmes is such a great story too, is that you have Ian in the rotation because he's spinning it. And then you have Holmes in the bullpen to give you kind of like a 1 inning or multi-inning role there with some versatility and based on being able to be to come in and be that fireman sometimes like Jesse Chavez was. Like I think Grant did a great job at that last year. I think that's a role he's proven that he's suited for. I wonder if there's more value in that than there would be in making a 4-inning start or a 5-inning start or, whatever, but we just haven't seen him go deeper yet. And I just think you could have him in the bullpen. There's a lot you could kind of do with this, and it's going to hinge on first, like how well Ian does, honestly, because I think Grant could just be that role. I think putting Ian in the bullpen is probably a waste of a roster spot, more so than it would be putting Grant in the bullpen, which I think adds some real value to your team. But I mean, they like Grant. He's getting the nod, I guess, in their own heads, ahead of Ian right now. So we'll see how it shakes out. But it is one of those things where you do want them to see them prioritize, protecting that bullpen, on the back end, not knowing who's going to cover. Pierce Johnson can't cover the 8th every night. And to your point, Brad, like I've thought about that myself. Is like, is a 6-man rotation possible? Because I haven't looked at all the off days. I know there's one before the home opener, but you've got April, you've got trips to San Diego and LA, you've got Tampa and Toronto, and you've got Phoenix and Denver. Like that's brutal. Like for a first month, and depending on how the days line up, like I do wonder if they could start, because you got to remember they were going Sale like every, Ronaldo every 7 days last year at the start of the season. It was like once every week with how the off days lined up. And I know Snip made a comment the other day about just like he'd be surprised with Sale and Ronaldo. He's like, honestly, like we'll probably just do it similarly. He's like, because it worked out so well for us. And I think it did. The balance is just you have to find out like how to get guys peaking in September and whatnot. But I think there's a chance they could even do that 6-man rotation or working a guy with spot starts, and that allows you to keep, to not have to, whether it's taking Pilar off the roster or somebody else, it allows you to kind of keep your depth in the bullpen too. I mean, Daysbell's going to be an optionable guy, but you need him. I mean, I think he's going to be like you. They've talked him up since the fall, really, and so there's a lot of maneuverability they could go with, and I do wonder if they just do that, bite the bullet on that 6-man thing. But especially now because the one guy who loved to go on 5 days, Fried, is no longer here. I don't know if Strider would be like, oh, I need to go on 5 days, or if Sale would be like that. I mean, Sale, they were given extra rest anyways, but like Fried was like that, where he's like, he was just more comfortable going every 5 rather than like an extra day of rest. I wonder now that if he's not here, if like the other guys would be comfortable with that, especially as you work Strider back into the fold.
Flexibility. Well, Justin, we're going to let you get out of here, but I do have one non-baseball question, and it's about what it's like to live in Florida basically for 7 weeks in February and March. How do you? What's your setup like? We obviously see you right now if you're watching on YouTube, but are you a hotel for 7 weeks guy? Or are you an Airbnb guy? What's going on down there?
So I'm in a hotel this time for half of it, and then I'll do an Airbnb. Usually we did a house the last couple years. This hotel's nice because it's only like 20 minutes from the facility, whereas some of these houses, because it's all spread out here, like in Inglewood and Port Charlotte and Northport, like some of these houses are like 30, 35 minutes away from the park. So you're getting up at like
every day both ways.
6. Oh my God. And then you're driving to dinner like 30 minutes, unless you want to, unless you're getting one of the mom and pop places right next to the house or something on the little strip. But it's like you're driving 30 minutes to get to any like civilization. So it's crazy. The first year I did a hotel because I was here for minor league camp, my first year on the beat, and then the lockout ended. So I kind of just stayed in that hotel for like, it was like 28 days or something like that in a row.
Points.
And then I went home and then I come. I love me some points. I love me some points. It's funny though. Like I almost feel like if you told me in college I'd be doing this, I'd be like, pretty sweet. Like I remember like my first years on the Mets beat, I was like, this is sick. I was like, I'm in Florida for 6 weeks. Somebody pays for me to eat. Somebody pays for me to stay here. The weather's terrific, which isn't, I mean, I guess it's cold in Atlanta now, but it's not as much of a problem as it was when you'd live in New York and then could go down to Florida to finally breathe for a couple of months. But man, I love Florida. It's awesome. Spring training is funny though, because it's like Groundhog Day. It's like the same day every day. You wake up at like 6, try to get your workout in, go to the ballpark, access in the morning. You got the games after, after the workouts, obviously you got the games. After workouts end, it's games, and then you're like driving. It feels like in Florida specifically, like Scott, I know you know this, man. You could go Cactus League. You could drive to all those places and span it 2 hours of one day and, put a postcard on each of them. And
not in Florida.
Here it's, oh my God, man. The amount of like 3 hour, I went to Lakeland a couple years ago. I've went to Lakeland 2 years in a row, actually. Dude, that I-4, man, those guys on this beat, DOB and Bowman, those guys that was no joke when it used to be in Orlando, and then Kissimmee and Lakeland were like the closest ones, man. That travel was no joke on I-4. Those boys were, that was probably back in the day before like podcasts really became big, man. They got a lot of use out of their iPod shuffles back then.
Scott, anything you want to add before we let Justin get out of here? I know you're dying.
No, we will save our Arizona and Arizona State smack talk for off air.
Man,
I'm sure we have just millions of very vested Wildcats and Sun Devils listening, but
that's right.
But yeah, Justin, you're the man. Thank you for taking time. I'm sure you just said you very busy days. We got Brave spring training games starting in 48 hours from when most people
Saturday,
are listening, and that begins the grind of like 190 some odd games plus whatever you're going to have in playoffs. I mean, it is baseball is here officially.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. No, I'm always happy to be on. I love like the part of spring training before the games start because you're just doing the workout. You get out of there early. So I worked out like twice today. Like I got a second lift in. Like it was awesome.
Wow.
Like I was just like, I've been at the hotel. Like I've been chilling. I was waiting for you guys to call. This is awesome, but I will be on the Fort Myers Express in a couple of days. And then from there, I'll need to get gas every like 5 days probably.
That makes sense. Well, people should be checking out your work at the AJC. Anything else you want to plug, Justin, in life? AJC.com?
Yeah, just AJC.com, Justin C. Toscano on Twitter, and Blue Sky for those who like either one of them. Yeah, I think that's it. But thank you.
Well, follow Justin's work. I know we definitely do. We read everything that you're writing and following on Twitter and Blue Sky, all those places. But we appreciate your time. We'll have to have you back on if you have time at some point. You'll be much busier now for a little while, but we'll try to beg you to come on again. As for everybody else, please subscribe to this podcast anywhere you find podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. Tell your friends, and we'll see everybody next time.